Hard times are fighting times for you and me. Hard times are fighting times for you and me. I'm a union activist and a cultural activist, and want to bring some songs to you about building solidarity and working together to make our workplaces safer, and the people that are injured, the people who are disabled, and the people that are killed, we're here to remember them today and let them know and everyone know that through solidarity, we're in this all together. This is a song written by Harry Stamper. He's a longshoreman, and I'm glad to be in the ILWU hall here. Harry was loading logs one day up in Coos Bay, Oregon. They would take these redwood logs and they get them, they ship them down the river, and then they roll them into these big barges. Well, one day a barge came and they rolled the logs in, and they got tangled up and went this way and that way and every which way. So the boss told him, he said, well, Harry, I want you to go down there and straighten out those logs. And he goes, well, how do you expect me to do that? I mean, these are 100-foot long logs. He goes, well, I will get you a crane with a hook on it, and you go down there and you wrap the log on it, and as we tighten it up, you get out of the way as soon as it gets tight. And he told the supervisor, you can go to the driveway and lick your nuts. And so the ILWU has a provision that says that if it's a health and safety beef, that they shut down the job, no work is done. And so Coos Bay is about 8 hours from the nearest arbitrator in Portland. So he sat down that day and he came up with this song. I think it should be the anthem of Workers' Memorial Day. It's called We Just Come to Work Here by Harry Stamper. Well, I've been working here for 15 years and I've seen a lot of changes come. I see people called supervisors and I see bosses called bums. I see people working for safety. There must be a reason why. This is your part, because that's what we say. We just come to work here. We don't come to die. Well, I'd like to end up with all of my fingers. I don't want my brain to get numb. I like to have my ears when retirement nears. I like to hear the applause come. I'd like to pick my grandchildren up, like to hear them when they cry. 'Cause I just come to work here. I don't come to die. Because if it's always level on the floor where you're working and your telephone's OSHA approved. Tell me how much you're spending on safety, pardon me if I'm not moved. 'Cause ever since 1970, you know the law's been on our side. That's why we just come to work here. We don't come to die. Now, I'll be the pitcher and you be the batter. You know that's just the old ball game. But when the load starts dropping and the things start popping, why the situation's not the same. I'm not saying that you don't care. I'm not saying that you don't try. I'm saying we just come to work here. We don't come to die. 'Cause if it's always level on the floor where you're working and your telephone's OSHA approved, you tell me how much you're spending on safety, pardon me if I'm not moved. 'Cause ever since 1970, you know the law's been on our side, saying we just come to work here. We don't come to die. Now you and I know that things aren't code, they could be fixed with relative ease. But we never did get anything by asking on our knees. Now I am looking you straight in the eye, shoulder to shoulder, side by side. I'm saying we just come to work here. We don't come to die. 'Cause if it's always level on the floor where you're working and your telephone's OSHA approved, you tell me how much you're spending on safety, pardon me if I'm not moved. 'Cause ever since 1970, you know the law's been on our side, saying we just come to work here. We don't come to die. That's right, we just come to work here. We don't come to die. Harry Stamper.
I'm Larry Rose. I was the Chief Public Health Medical Officer at Cal-OSHA for 28 years. And I came to work under the first Brown administration when Jerry Brown was a young guy and had some ideals that he really put forth and convinced me that was the best agency for me to work with or work as a public health doctor. So I don't want to go over the whole history except to say as a general kind of, how should I put it, panorama of what we had. And when I first went to work, the labor unions in California were very strong. And all the major unions had health and safety representatives that were very active. And we worked directly with the unions when we went out on inspections. And I was involved in most of the inspections that involved chemical exposures, pesticide exposures, musculoskeletal problems, such as carpal tunnel syndrome, when the computers were first coming in. So there were a lot of problems that needed new addressing. And in those days, we wrote special orders, because the California Labor Code is excellent. And what it says is that Cal-OSHA can put forth, enforcement, and those are adopted through the so-called Standards Board and into various sections called the General Industry Safety Orders. And those were well written. And we used those, but there were a lot of hazards that were not addressed in that. And that's why it was so important to have public health medical doctors on site to go in and document through going over the health histories and contacting their treating doctors what was happening and why we needed to set up special circumstances to protect those workers. So that's kind of the general, quick picture of what I was doing in the first Brown administration. After that, I went through several Republican administrations. I guess the worst one was Duke Majan when he abolished Cal-OSHA, but then it was brought back by a special statewide election, Prop 97, and reestablished, and they had to put us all back to work. So let me now jump to what's going on now, because that's what we're here for, to determine. And I think first we have to understand what's happening in Washington. See, OSHA was established under the Labor Department. It was a part of the Labor Department, and all the labor laws and regulations under the Labor Department are now being administered by, in fact, the nominee for that post, what is his name? It's a Latin name. Anyway, is coming before the Senate right now. It was approved. And his statement was, when they asked him, well, are you going to enforce health and safety regulations, reasonable working conditions, decent working conditions, et cetera, all the things that are in the law, he said, well, I'm going to defer to Donald Trump, and he'll make the decisions. So that's what we're facing. We're facing practically a non-functioning Fed OSHA at this point, and it makes it more important than ever for Cal-OSHA to put the pressure on Cal-OSHA to do the right thing. So as Steve mentioned earlier, the number of enforcement regulators, they're called COSHOs, or compliance health and safety officers, that do the enforcing are 200. And the number of workers in California, employees, are 18,500,000. So that gives a ratio of one inspector to about 95,000 workers. Now, this is 2 times worse than what but the ratio exists for Oregon, 3 times worse for the ratio that exists for the state of Washington. So if you multiply 200 by 3, you would get 600 inspectors if we met the standard that's going on in Washington, state of Washington. The ILO, International Labor Organization, under the United Nations, first recommended way back before I went to work that the ratio should be 10 times what we have here in California, which should be 2,000 inspectors. So what I'm telling you is, first off, we don't have enough inspectors to cover the existing health and safety transgressions in workplaces in California. That's important. But even more important is, what is the general atmosphere at Cal-OSHA now under the Brown appointee? And this is linked, the same agency, it's called the Department of Industrial Relations, is linked to administering Cal-OSHA and the workers' comp system. So we have to look at that. Then what happens to the injured worker now? And I want to give you the present picture and not go back the way it was. What happens now is the employer refers him to a doctor of the employer's choice. Well, who are those doctors? Well, the doctors work in so-called networks for the insurance company. The insurance companies set up the networks, so they're in a conflict of interest with the doctor, the initial doctor, the one that determines it's a workplace injury or illness, because they want more referrals from the employers. So that's the first experience that an injured worker has now. From there, he can then request a month or two later to see another independent medical examiner. And if he does, that independent examiner may say, well, this man is really injured, it is a workplace injury, and recommends the following treatment. Well, first he has to determine how much disability. Is it temporary or permanent? And then he has to decide what kind of treatment is necessary. Well, what they've done in the Department of Industrial Relations, they have contracted with an outfit called Maximus. Now, Maximus is composed mostly of outside doctors that determine whether the treatment that's recommended by the California doctor is allowed. And this is called independent medical review. And they turned down 80% of those treatment plans, which is just shocking. And that's the kind of setup that an injured worker or ill worker faces now. And I think it's important to understand that this system is an outrage and totally is at odds with what the original purpose of workers' compensation was, which was that all the workers had to give up their right to sue an employer because the system was going to take care of them regardless of who was at fault. They automatically had medical coverage, total medical coverage, and an evaluation that was fair. Well, that's not happening anymore, and that's under the Department of Industrial Relations. So let me talk for a minute about, what the hell is the Department of Industrial Relations? What the hell is the Department of Industrial Relations? What is their mission? Who are they? Well, it's turned into an empire. And the empire, the empress of the empire, is a woman named Christine Baker. Now, Christine Baker has decided that the mission of Cal-OSHA should be assistant and partnership with all the big corporations. In other words, go in and talk to them. And any of the inspectors that feel, no, their job is to enforce, she tells them, well, don't stop with this I gotcha approach, and just tell them what needs to be done, and we'll assume that they've gone ahead and done it. Because of the very sparse number of follow-up inspectors available, they can't even go in and determine if the employer, there aren't enough of them to go back and determine if the employer has indeed totally remediated the situation that created the injuries and illness in that workplace. So that's the situation now at the Department of Industrial Relations. When I went to work, the chief of Cal-OSHA was a labor guy. His name was Art Carter. But after that, there was another chief that came in later under a Republican, Wilson, a guy named John Howard, who was a doctor. And he recognized what was going on. And it turns out that the policies under John Howard, under a Republican governor, were much better than what the policies are now under Jerry Brown. In other words, workers were getting a fairer shake in those days when Wilson, as you know, after Wilson came Schwarzenegger, and most of what Wilson was doing was continued under Schwarzenegger. But So what we have is a Democratic governor now, older Jerry Brown, that's appointed an anti-worker head of the Department of Industrial Relations. And what happened recently in 2012 was, at first, when OSHA was when Jerry Brown won the governorship, the chief of Cal-OSHA was a lawyer that I had worked with, Ellen Wydess. And she was working with others in the agency that were very committed to the mission of Cal-OSHA, particularly trying to do the right thing for workers. What happened with the 2012 explosion at the Chevron plant, I don't know how many, I got very involved in that, as did Steve, and we started looking closely at what happened, and that was a preventable explosion, and the criminals involved in that case were the Chevron management in that refinery in Richmond. So then what happened was there was a long delay. It went on for a month, 2 months. Nothing heard from Cal-OSHA, and they kept getting the response from Christine Baker, well, we're still working or we're still looking at it. And then Ellen Wydess, much to my, how should I put it, surprise, because I thought she was pretty much under the heel of Christine Baker, came up with a series of citations that were serious willful violations of all the Cal-OSHA regulations. And at the time, about 19 workers that were at that, where that pipe was leaking, and the vapors coming off, and they said, we've got to shut this unit down. And management said, no, you don't, keep it going. And then it blew, and as we all know, like a mushrooming black cloud, soared over Richmond and drifted toward the East Bay and south. And, that was why Ellen Wydess insisted on issuing several of these citations, willful, serious citations. Now, the sad thing is at Cal-OSHA that the fines that they now issue are a pittance compared to what, say, a plant like Chevron makes in one day. Turns out that all the fines together that she issued came to 0.1% of the daily profits that Chevron makes right there in that refinery. So it was nothing in terms of a real penalty. Anyway, what then happened was that Christine Baker fired Ellen Wydess and brought in one of her cronies, who is now the head of Cal-OSHA. And yet, you look at that and you think, well, she pretty much did her job. And the people that we're working with are several of my former coworkers. They quit. And so now Cal-OSHA is not only, sadly undermined by the number of inspection workers, but in addition, they're heard over by this, I'll call it the empress of the Department of Industrial Relations, who is demanding that everybody act like they're compatriots of the corporate malefactors or bad actors. Finally, Steve has said this many times, and I certainly agree with him, that the initial doctor that does the examination when a worker is injured or ill, a workplace-induced injury or illness, that is the, how should I put it, the most important point in that worker's experience. Does that doctor file a first report, it's called a doctor's first report, of that workplace injury or illness, or does he just say, go back to work, BTW on the form? And if he does declare it a workplace injury or illness, that has to go on the log of that workplace. Well, you see now, a lot of the doctors said, back to work, you'll be fine. And you go into some of these offices in these corporations, and you'll see people sitting with plaster of Paris on their leg or arm, or looking really ill because they were told, well, you don't have to do your usual job, but you have to be here. So that's the kind of chicanery that's going on now, and it's very sad. And final note is what's happening in Sacramento now is very relevant in those terms because Senator Lara and Senator Atkins from Los Angeles and San Diego, respectively, have put forth a bill for a single-payer health care plan. And under that plan, all of us, every person that breathes and lives in California has the right to total health care and to choose their own physician. And that would be true for any worker that was injured, any workplace injury or illness.
It went through today.
And it went through today, the Senate, did it? Oh, okay, thank you for that information. So it looks like the Assembly is going to pass it, and I think it behooves all of us to put a lot of pressure on Jerry Brown to sign that bill, and it would be a model for the rest of the country. And with that, thank you.
Oh, this is another song. Well, it's not really a song. It's actually kind of a story. It's an Irish note called the sick note. In the sick note, you know, when you get sick, you have to explain why you're not at work. And so this is a song by the Dubliners, I believe, but at least they sang it, and that's where I heard it. Dear sir, I write this note to inform you of my plight. And at the time of writing, I am not a pretty sight. My body is all black and blue, my face a deadly gray. I write this note to tell you why Patty's not at work today. While working on the 14th floor, some bricks I had to clear. To throw them down from off the top seemed quite a good idea. But the boss, he wasn't pleased, he was an awful sod. He said I had to cart them down the ladder on a hod. While clearing all those bricks by hand, it seemed so very slow. I hoisted up a barrel and secured the rope below. But in my haste to do the job, I was too blind to see that a barrel full of building bricks was heavier than me. So when I had untied the rope, the barrel fell like lead. And clinging tightly to the rope, I started up instead. It took off like a rocket. And to my dismay, I found that halfway up, I met the bloody barrel coming down. Well, the barrel broke my shoulder as to the ground it sped. And when I reached the top, I banged the pulley with my head. I held on tight, though numb with shock from this almighty blow. And the barrel spilled the bricks, and then it lost half of its load to 14 floors below. Now when those bricks fell from the barrel down into the floor, I then outweighed the barrel, so I started up once more. I held on tightly to the rope and I flew off of the ground and landed on those building bricks that were scattered on the ground. Now I lay there on the deck, I thought to be past the worst. But when the barrel reached the top, that's when the bottom burst. A shower full of bricks came down on me, I had no hope. And all of the confusion, I let go the bloody rope. Well, the barrel being heavier, it down came once more and landed right on top of me as I lay on the floor. It broke 3 ribs in my left arm, and I can only say, I hope you'll understand why Patty's not at work today. A little bit of humor, this stuff.